So the Giants signed him to a 1-year deal, could be worth up to $21 million, $10.5 million guaranteed. Remember, they signed Jameis Winston to a 2-year deal, $8 million, but they can get out of that, as Dan was saying, if they want. All right, Jamie, what's your take on this with Wilson going to the Giants, now joining Jameis Winston?
I would be very surprised if they still drafted a quarterback at 3. They could obviously still take one later in the draft, and who knows how far Sanders may fall if they decide to jump back into the first round and draft him. I did see one mock draft where they took, I think it was Hunter at 3, Travis Hunter at 3, and then still got Shadur Sanders at 32. So obviously making a trade to get back in the first round. So something like that could still unfold for them, or they take, obviously one of the, third, fourth, fifth quarterbacks that are going to be, rated depending on whoever they like. But in any event, it feels like this is what they're going with in 2025. And it's not a horrible strategy, just if you don't love Sanders and can't get Cam Ward. So, like Dan said, I was more excited about Jameis for the receiving core there for the Giants. We'll see if they add to their receiving core, because now Travis Hunter is certainly in play. And I would imagine they're probably looking to draft him or to play him at wide receiver as opposed to corner. It's really all about Malik Nabers at this point, because he's the prize for the Giants when it comes to fantasy managers. Nobody's drafting Russell Wilson in 1 quarterback leagues. He's a mid-round pick at best in super flex and 2 quarterback leagues, fallback option. And who knows, again, how long he'll hold the job for. I do think this is bad for Nabers to a certain extent, so the heights that he could have had with Jameis, I mentioned this on Monday's show, that following the signing, I put him at wide receiver 4. I dropped him back down to where he was prior to the Jameis Winston signing, which is still a late first round pick, early second round pick. I can't imagine this coaching staff does anything to get away from Nabers and still featuring him. But like you said, Russ has sort of been good for some receivers. He did actually get, which is surprising, I think it's 5 seasons, certainly 4, but it might be 5 seasons. I'll go back and check, of a receiver catching 10 plus touchdowns. We know he did it with Cortland Sutton in Denver. He actually had Doug Baldwin lead the NFL in touchdown receptions. I believe it was 2014. Metcalf did it twice. Lockett did it once. So there's still optimism for Nabers to take a step forward in that category. But does he give him 170 targets? Does he get to 110 catches or so, which is what he was around last year? Can he be a 1,500-yard receiver? Those are all questions that I think we'll have to sort of see how it plays out. So it's not the most ideal situation for Nabers, but I don't think it's horrible given what he was dealing with last year with DeVito and Daniel Jones and Tim Boyle and Drew Lock. It was a messy group. So this gives you a little bit more stability from that spot.
I would even argue that while it's not anywhere near what Jameis would have been, it's a pretty solid spot for Nabers. I was looking into some data. This is according to FDN Fantasy. Malik Nabers led the NFL with 30 targets off of go routes last season. And last year, Russell Wilson averaged 4.2 targets off go routes in 2024. That was 3rd most in the NFL. That's just a drop in the bucket as far as what he did in the deep path. He had the 8th most completions of 20-plus air yards, despite only playing 11 games. His EPA per drop back on 20-plus air yards throws was 2nd in the NFL. Best completion percentage over expected on these 20-plus yard air throws. Number 2 in the league in EPA on just 10 to 19 air yard throws. And number 2 in CPOE, completion percentage over expected, in that same category. When it comes down to Wilson, it depends what he's doing on the field. Last year, he had a 10-to-1 touchdown interception ratio when he got the ball out in under 2.5 seconds, 74.3% completion rate. When it was over 2.5 seconds, I should say, he dropped to 55.5% with the 33rd EPA. He really struggled when he held on to the ball, when he couldn't confirm what he saw pre-snap, post-snap, when they rotated on him or it just wasn't there. That's when things started to break down for him, similar to Daniel Jones. But when he got the ball out early, he really gave those receivers an advantage. And I think that's going to help Malik Nabers. He can win early on those go routes, isolated on the outside of a backside of a 1x3, or just if they move him into the slot, because that's something he did with Jaden Daniels at LSU. The Giants weren't able to take advantage of last year with Daniel Jones and Drew Lock. So I do think the vertical game is going to be big for Nabers with Russell.
Yeah.
Two things, Adam. DK Metcalf's best season, his second season, that was obviously a much younger Russell Wilson in a system that he was, certainly familiar with. But Metcalf's best year was year 2. Obviously, Malik Nabers entering year 2. You talk about just physical freaks in terms of just, how they can operate. And then you look at what he did last year with George Pickens in the first 6 games. 4 of those 6 games, he was north of 16 PPR points. That's not what we're hoping for with Nabers. We're hoping for 18 to 20. But again, you're looking at a receiver that's a little bit more, I think, polished as a route runner at a younger, age than what Pickens was able to do. So if the vertical game comes into play, which we know has been Russell Wilson's strength, certainly over the last 2 seasons or 3 seasons, maybe his entire career, but it's been a little bit more magnified with what he did in Denver and Pittsburgh, I think. That makes Nabers a little bit more deadly, because it feels like, to Dan's point, that's what was missing with the Giants quarterbacks, and the ability to take those shots. So it's probably something that Dable and Joe and Shine looked at and said, okay, this is, something that can enhance our offense. But at 37, he turns 37 in November, is that skill set going to still be there? Looking at like Aaron Rodgers, for example, who's sort of lost the want to, at least, coming back from last year, of throwing the ball down the field. I don't think that happens for Russell Wilson, but you just never know as they get older.
Yeah, Joe Shane. I think you were gonna say it right, and then you got cold feet there. Joe Shane.
Oh, I'm with 2 Giants guys, so I want to make sure I'm getting it right.
Yeah, the issue, I think, for Nabers is format. I think, right, because for whatever reason, maybe this will change. Russell Wilson he's been in the league since 2012. He's had almost no season. I would say maybe 2 seasons where he's thrown the ball a lot. Usually throws about 31 times per game, and it's pretty consistent. And not only that, this will be his 5th coach in 5 years. He's gone from Pete Carroll to Hackett to Peyton to Tomlin, now to Dable, with different offensive coordinators. And no matter what, they just don't let him throw that much. So that means fewer catches. And, that's kind of what concerns me. Like, can Nabers get to 100 catches with Russell Wilson? I mean, sure, but it's just a weird thing with Wilson. Remember the let Russ cook thing? It just throughout his career, he's had, I think, 2 seasons where he's been like more than 34 pass attempts. Is usually in the 31 range. And I just want to say this for Wilson, though, in your super flex leagues, you don't think, like, nobody thinks he's been a good quarterback the last 4 years, basically. Everyone thinks he's the worst. He's not. He's finished as QB 13, 17, 14, and 15 per game in 4-point per passing touchdown leagues. 13, 19, 13, and 15 per game in 6-point per passing touchdown leagues. That's pretty good. I want to take a look, though, at what I don't think he does well, and then we'll move on. We have to talk about Stephon Diggs. Also, today's topic is 5 players that Dan really likes this year. But I want to take a look at some shots of, just for fun, of Russell Wilson. I think his biggest issue, he just doesn't see open players, okay?
In the middle of the field, yeah.
Anywhere. So everything you see against the Jets, this is what's concerning. Everything you see against the Jets is from the first quarter. This is almost every dropback of the first quarter against the Jets. Look at this play. You see George Pickens in the middle of the field? Like, that is an open receiver. He's about to come open. He rolls out. He does complete this pass short to this outlet that around the 33-yard line. I don't know who it is. Can kind of, if we zoom in, might be able to see the description of the play. But that's one play where he's missed someone. Let's go to our next one. Look to the left. The guy is wide open. The pocket is clean. I think he ended up scrambling on this play. Okay, let's go to our next play. This is a tough one. You see near the 11-yard line. I don't know if that's George Pickens, but whoever that is, he has beaten his man. A great throw is probably a touchdown here. There was a little bit of pressure, but an open guy, but that's a tough one. Next play. I mean, come on. Look at the right side of the field. This ball goes to George Pickens, top left, blanketed by Sauce Gardner. And he didn't even look to his right. He's got 2 guys wide open. And this is what I noticed last year when I was watching his tape from the Broncos. So there was this one play in particular where Jerry Jeudy is wide open for like this huge gain, probably a touchdown. Doesn't even look at him. How does this ball go to George Pickens? Just look to the right, man. There are 2 players that are absolutely wide open. All right, last one. So there's 2 shots on this play. This is the same play. This is against the Browns. Everything you just saw was in 1 quarter against the Jets. Pat Freiermuth is about the 29-yard line. Dwayne Washington is at the 15-yard line. So go to the next frame. This is about half a second later. These 3 defenders for the Browns at the 25-yard line are all about to come in. They've already started. Pat Freiermuth is 4 yards behind them. This is an 85-yard touchdown to Pat Freiermuth. Instead, he checks down to Washington at the 15-yard line. This play drove me crazy. I see this from Russell Wilson now. I don't know if he just doesn't go through his progressions much. Dan, you were talking about what you noticed on tape with him, but that's 1 quarter against the Jets. And then there's just this one play that stood out against the Browns. He is just not seeing these players who are wide open.
Yeah, he has trouble seeing the field. And I think on all the plays you broke down, I think every single one of them would qualify in what I said before, plays that took over 2.5 seconds for him to get rid of the ball. If he sees it pre-snap and it confirms it post-snap, he gets rid of the ball. Usually it's going to be a good player. At least the numbers say that. When the opposite happens, you didn't even get into it, Adam, but his sack rate is through the roof compared to where he was in his career earlier. He was never good in that regard, but now it's become a nightmare situation where it's one of the worst in the NFL when it comes to pressure to sack rate. So it's just something that the Giants can have to deal with. They know what they're getting here. They're not getting a perfect quarterback. But I think from the fantasy standpoint, this actually is good news for Malik Nabers and could potentially bring a player like Slayton back into the mix as well.